Hello, I'm Justin Wheeler, and welcome to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. What if you could predict the amount and date of each of your donors' next gift? That's what today's conversation is all about. I'm very excited to sit down with Wes Moon, founder and CEO of Wisely, a technology company helping nonprofits and charities accelerate their fundraising. Using AI to generate better predictions, they improve pipeline health and get fundraisers focused on the activities they need to complete to be successful. Let's dive into the conversation now.
The best thing that we can do is just raise as much money as possible and then give it to the people around the world.
We set out to raise $1,000 to help this person, but we had no idea how to fundraise.
Then you're doing it wrong.
Okay.
That is unacceptable, and that is not the way to run a board.
Who is this girl, and what's the thought process when you're like, do I include a nickel?
And it snowballs like any peer-to-peer campaign. The more people that view this content, the further and further it grows.
The community raised $55 million in 2019.
The more nonprofits can give their donor base that experience of the impact that's being made on the ground level, there's nothing else you have to give someone. This is Nonstop Nonprofit. Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to Nonstop Nonprofit. Today we have a very exciting guest, the founder and CEO of Wisely. We're going to talk all about fundraising and AI today. Wes, thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Super excited to be here, Justin. Thanks.
Absolutely. Before we dive too much into the technology side of things, tell us your story. Where are you from and why do you care about AI?
I guess I would go back almost 20 years. I got into fundraising largely by accident. My friend worked at the University of Toronto and said, hey, do you want a job? They're hiring people. And basically, they're just looking for young people who were cheap. I knew something about computers. They had CRM. They were building an SAP application and building a fundraising module attached to it. And when I got hired, you could actually look at a donor in the CRM, but you couldn't actually see any giving information or contact information. So it was pretty early days in building that CRM. And I spent 10 years at the U of T. And for the listeners in the South, this is the big U of T, the University of Toronto, similar to Michigan State in size. And when I started, we were raising somewhere in the vicinity of 40 or 50 million. 7-8 years later, we had achieved 110 million. And
Wow.
they're now raising a couple $100 million every year. Large public research institution. And luckily enough there, my introduction, I guess, to AI, my boss had dropped off an article in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, which was how banks were using predictive models to find people for wealth management. And she said, can you do this? And I don't know, I'll give it a shot. Did a little bit of research, built a model, learned that if someone had a middle name, they're more likely to make a major gift. Of course, that was all about process and prospect researchers, and all our major gift donors, of course, had a middle name because the researchers put it into the CRM. So you didn't really need anything too smart to get that done. I then spent really like the next 10 years working as a consultant in a couple of other fundraising shops, and decided to make the move over to Blackbaud to learn more about technology. It was there where one of our jobs was to help build out some technology partnerships so that more things could connect to their CRM. Drank the Kool-Aid, started my own business. And really what we wanted to do is to be able to provide good predictions to all charities. So if you think of what we did at U of T or some of the larger national hospital organizations, they have a lot of process. They have a lot of people who do a lot of math in the background to kind of help identify good prospects and move them through a pipeline. And we wanted to use predictions to be able to do that for fundraisers at scale. So you don't necessarily need to be raising $50 million to be able to do that anymore. That's really like why we wanted to bring AI.
Got it. When looking at predictions or a predictive model, what are some of the key data points that help you predict whether or not a donor is ready to give, or, you know, whatever the other criteria is that you're looking at, or outcome you're looking for?
Yeah, humans are surprisingly predictable, actually. Justin, I'll say that. Unsurprisingly, past giving is the best predictor for future giving. And that's not always the case with every individual. But en masse, if you made a previous gift, you're more likely to make another gift than the general public, if you will. And then you start to get into a lot of different ways to look at this. Now, the way AI works is that it does pattern recognition on an individual basis. And the data that we look at is structured versus unstructured. So unstructured would be a picture. It would be consuming our conversation and changing that into text. Structured is looking at data patterns within a database, for instance, and using that to essentially pattern recognition and extension.
Okay.
So when we look at what we're doing that structured data approach, and we're using it to identify that pattern, which almost always starts with the previous gift, but then what is the next most important variable for any one of those individuals? And there are some cases for certain where the past gift isn't the most important variable. Perhaps the most important variable is this person's net worth because it's off the chart. And because they made a small gift, we may then be making a prediction of a larger gift next time.
So for our listeners tuning in and maybe not exactly familiar with the term AI, define the term for us just so we make sure we all are on the same baseline from our listeners' perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll start first with what it isn't.
There you go.
AI stands for artificial intelligence, ML, machine learning. It's not generalized intelligence. So we're not building a robot that can figure this out. We're building a machine. It is very much like a machine that will consume some data and produce a couple outputs. And the way you look at it, and it learns over time, and it learns from your data. That's where the machine learning, the ML, comes into play. So when we consider this and that learning enhancement, you take a set of data and you look at positive outcomes and you look at negative outcomes. So I asked Justin for a gift. Justin made a gift. That's a positive outcome. And then we look at Justin's friend, and Justin's friend didn't make a gift, is a negative. So you're always trying to pull the curve up and down for every individual.
Okay.
To basically, if you think of it in math, it's almost like a graph. Where is this graph going? What is the equation for any individual as it pertains to a next gift? And when we think of fundraising, or AI today, it's very much about answering a very specific question. The U of T, actually, the birthplace of AI or modern AI, had a contest. Is it a pug? Is it a muffin? And that's a very specific question. And for about 10 years, a computer couldn't beat a human from telling an image of a pug versus an image of a muffin. Surprisingly, if you Google it, they look very similar. Now, what allowed that to happen is the training. So some guy sat in his basement, I assume it was a basement, maybe a garage, and clicked through and taught a computer just by saying, choose one, which one's a pug, which one's a muffin. And over time, it built up a repository of information to be able to tell the difference.
Interesting.
So it's that learning aspect of
Right.
AI that's very important here.
So with the predictive models that you've built at Wisely, I would presume that the more data that you're getting, the smarter they're becoming. Maybe accurate's not the right word, but just the more robust they're becoming for the end user, the fundraiser in their strategies. Would that be a correct assumption?
Yeah, totally. So the longer we work with a client, the more accurate the data becomes. But also the more clients we work with, the more accurate the data becomes.
Sure.
We're not commingling data per se, but the learning is centralized into one brain.
Yeah, that makes sense. So where does a fundraiser get started? So if someone's listening to this and they're like, you know what, okay, we need to be smarter at fundraising. AI makes a lot of sense for that. Where would you recommend someone get started? Or if I were to onboard with Wisely, what does that process look like? And how do we start using AI in our fundraising strategy?
So I think it's probably easier to talk about what we would do first.
Okay.
And then there are some other options to consider. We need to connect to your CRM. So that's typically the heavy lifting job that we would need to do depending on your CRM. So if you're with a Blackbot or a silent partner system, it doesn't take very long at all. We'll be set up basically within 24 hours because they have an API. We've already built out the integration, and we take all your data and then we run it into our machine. And our machine thinks for about 24 hours, depending on how much data you have. So some of our larger clients, it takes 24 hours. Some of our smaller clients, it can actually just take minutes if they only have 5,000 donors a year, 10,000 donors a year. And what we then produce as an output, and we do this every day because data changes, time changes an output. And the concept is next gift amount, next gift date. So when you start to think of what could you do if you knew every donor's next gift amount or next gift date, there's a lot. We are very focused on using these two predictions today, but where we want to go into the future, and this is entirely doable, is creating a customized donor plan for every single person you've ever met. Is this person an event donor? Is this person a planned gift donor? Will they make a gift in the estate? Do you need to assign a stewardship officer to this person? Making estimated lifetime value. So all those things are possible to predict using AI and that structured data with the data that almost every charity has if they're using a CRM.
Yeah. So on those two concepts, next gift amount and next gift date, is that meant to be a mark or like an indicator for the fundraising team to be like, hey, go talk to this individual around this time, ask for this much? Or is it meant to be like, hey, this is when we think this person will give without an appeal?
Yeah, generally speaking, we are using it for people making larger gifts.
Okay.
So depending on our client, that might be at 500, that might be at 1,000, that might be at 5 or 10,000, depending on their sophistication in their major gift program.
Got it.
What we then do is we advocate for a process. So I told you that story about U of T where I built my model. I got better at building models. I no longer build models. I have mathematicians for that now. But what we always struggled with in any of the organizations where we did this hard math work to figure out who should we actually spend time with, what relationships should we build? Because as fundraisers, time is always of the essence. We don't have enough.
Right.
And we always struggled to put that into practice. So the advancement services team or the operations team would come up with some good recommendations that would go to gift officers, and gift officers would go back to the way they always did their job, which was talking to the people that they know, doing a little bit of outreach to the people that they don't know. And it felt more secure for them to be able to hit their goal that way. Because it's the way they had always done it. So we wanted to build a product into this. So behind the scenes, we have our prediction engine that's making these pretty cool predictions, if I could say. And the concept is, how do we put them into practice? So the first tool that we've built is a prospecting tool. So most organizations have someone whose job it is to try to find some of those donors who look like they could become major gift donors. So we mine the database for the person. We provide a tool that allows that operations person or sometimes that fundraiser to assign a donor to their portfolio. And then we built a prioritization tool to say, just as you said, when should I reach out to this person? How much should I be thinking about in terms of qualifying this donor for? What does my opportunity look like? And the very cool thing for some of these fundraisers and operators, you have a portfolio. So typical portfolio in the fundraising world is about 100 people, give or take. You can tell if your portfolio supports your goal with a reasonable degree of accuracy on the first day of that year. We're picking a gift amount and a gift date.
Yeah. And
with those two pieces of information, it becomes a very powerful tool to plan your year, to plan your quarter, to plan your month, to plan your day. That's about prioritizing who you spend time with and when.
Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like it also brings a ton of efficiency into just the whole cultivation process of with major donors in particular. And if you have these predictions, you have these dates, then you know exactly who and when to be talking with at the right time. You don't want to be too early or too late. You want to be at the right time. And that sounds like that's exactly what this helps a fundraiser do.
Totally. And what's very interesting, and this is a byproduct of what we've built, is that it seems like the best time to thank, well, obviously the best time to thank a donor is right after they make their last gift. But most charities don't have the resources to thank every single donor after every single gift with a live human being. But if you see someone who makes a small gift, but their next gift appears to be quite large, throw them right into a portfolio, and you get to start with stewardship right after they made their last gift. It's a nice touch.
Yeah. Is this all a part of the Wisely product? Like you have a portfolio tool that will bring the donors into the portfolio and show this information? Is that the right, or is this through the integration with the CRM?
You can do it either way because we have a deep integration. You can use your CRM to do it, or you can use our product to do it. Many CRMs have different capabilities. So we needed to build some core function to make sure that people could use the data.
Got it. So we've talked about, a couple of like concepts, positive concepts, when thinking about AI. As you've built out the product and as you've gotten deeper into the AI predictive modeling for fundraising, are there concepts that just don't work well with AI, or things that fundraisers, should stay away from when they think about AI and fundraising?
I guess I would say there's a general warning, and that general warning would be true of almost all AI, and it involves bias. So bias as it pertains to AI is generally based on the process that exists at an organization today. So when you're looking at your data and you're doing pattern extension on what's happened, so the data reflects the process that it exists at an organization. So if I'm a school, let's say, and I'm only talking to engineers, the AI is going to propagate that. It's going to say, well, you need to talk to all the engineers all the time because they're the best. They make the best gifts, they're the best donors. You need to have more events for them because they're the people who attend. And that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy where if there's a process that goes into it and you're not careful about what that process is and what desired outcome you have, you can get into a death spiral. So we had this concept where we wanted to be able to recommend next action in a very simple way. And what we found is that it went into the next best action was an email always, because the email was the most common. And then because it was the most common and recommended, then there was more email. So we had to actually not use that and go with the concept of it has to be a real piece of product. You can't do it in a light way. You can't, otherwise bias will get you.
Got it. That makes, yeah, and you have to then start to unlearn the biases. So is there a sort of threshold where it doesn't make sense for a nonprofit to use machine learning because they don't have enough data, or can they leverage kind of, as you mentioned, the data is not commingled in your process, but leverage the learnings of other people's data and apply it to their own sort of donor file?
If you do not have a lot of data, and let's talk about what a lot of data means. If you don't have a couple years of 10,000 donors coming in, it would be very difficult for an organization, even if they had the dollar resources, to actually be able to build their own AI product.
Okay.
You just don't have enough data for it to be statistically significant. If you're going with someone who's productized AI, and there's a few of us out there who are doing it, that starts to become a little bit easier. Because you're starting, there's a concept of a cold start. So you've got a model that has been trained on a similar data set and you just throw your data into it. So you may not have enough data to actually train, but there's probably enough for it to be directionally accurate. And we're trying to be able to support charities in you have 5,000 gifts a year, 2,000 gifts a year. We want to be able to support you. So we've designed our AI model to be federated so that we should be able to do that.
When organizations bring their data to you specifically, do they have to purchase more data to kind of get more detail around the specific donor? You mentioned wealth information. So if an organization is not doing any sort of wealth scanning of their donors today, when they come to you, is that something that you do to enhance the data, or do they have to purchase the data to make the machine learning more effective?
In both Canada and the United States, there is an absolute treasure of free data available. And the beautiful piece of it is that it's not personally identifiable. So everything that we do is not personally identifiable when we append any of this data. We think that's the right privacy approach to take. And with that supplemental free data that's available, that allows us to get to about 90%, give or take, observed accuracy.
Okay.
So if you purchase some supplemental data, which we've tested with, it does improve the accuracy a little bit, in particular on the outliers. So predicting someone from 100,000 to 1 million. However, that piece is, we're still at 90%. Without it. So if a client has it, we'll consume the data, but we don't actually ask our clients to go out and buy data.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. So at Fundraise, we're doing some machine learning, not yet on, not predicting like next donation date or amounts, more actually on the fraudulent side. So we actually just recently released a model that's helping detect fraudulent transactions across like the Fundraise ecosystem. And it's been fascinating to see the effectiveness of it and understanding, what are the characteristics of a fraudulent transaction. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to partner on the fundraising side, because what you're talking about, I think, would benefit a lot of our customers. And there's a lot of data that would, I think, bring a lot of value to the fundraising customer base in terms of the concepts that you guys are focused on as it relates to outcomes. It's
pretty interesting. Our CTO, Ryan Henry, worked in the payment industry, and that was his introduction to AI.
Okay.
Was the fraud detection.
Yeah.
And it's very effective there. But also there's, the applications for AI are pretty, I mentioned humans are very predictable. We have a partner, an AI partner, who we're hoping to do a pilot project with on personality. So with just a couple hundred words, you can actually predict someone's Ocean score. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Ocean. It's a personality matrix, a little bit like Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
But each one is a linear scale. So openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And we really want to do a test with that in fundraising.
Yeah.
On the right client and the right data set. But I wonder how effective that would be in helping predict some interesting things.
Yeah, that actually kind of leads to my next question. I was going to ask, what are some other areas that you guys are interested in building machine learning around as it relates to fundraising and nonprofits in particular? Is there anything else that you guys are noodling on or thinking about that would bring a nice uplift to organizations trying to scale and raise more?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we think of our grand vision, if you will, of being able to provide a donor plan for every single constituent that you've worked with.
Yeah, that's super interesting.
Looking at lifetime value. So what we then need to do is we need to be able to work with the event folks. We need to be able to work with the direct marketers and the digital marketers to say, these are the types of engagements that this audience needs, and being able to cohort data for the clients, because that's a lot of hard work. And we don't understand the communication of the charity and how they actually speak to their donors. What we can do is identify and group people so that they can focus on their mission, and we do the math in the background.
Yeah.
So when we think about the direction that we're going, that's very much a focus. We've built a couple of light models for some of our clients who wanted to do some monthly donor conversion, for instance, on gift file. And we're actually doing some work with some of our clients right now about looking at event participants and event sponsors in that peer-to-peer space, and seeing if there's some good ways to actually monetize that while they push off an event for a year, for instance, for some of them in-person events.
Interesting. Very interesting. Where do you see your company going in regards to on the front end digital fundraising, whether it's like within peer-to-peer or website giving? Do you see a need for more enhanced machine learning on that side, like changing button colors, changing images, changing copy depending on what you know about the individual visiting your sites? Anything there that you think could be interesting to help organizations see higher conversions on web traffic, for instance?
Yeah, totally. And honestly, on that, I don't think we are the people who are going to solve it.
Okay.
The people who are going to solve that are the people who are very focused on digital marketing.
Yeah.
So when we think of segmentation and plans and what are we doing with this donor, that's where we need to live. And the people who are solely focused on that UX, and UX has AI tools out there right now
to
help predict what is the best case there's a company that I do some work with in Toronto. They're a startup, and they're doing digital storytelling as a part of their AI project. So it's actually taking the messages that are going out and looking at them and saying, this is how to optimize it. This is what you need to put in new ones.
Got it. Makes sense.
The AI space is so specialized, and the question that you want to use your model to answer is so specific that you wouldn't want to be so divergent.
Got it.
In your approach.
Makes total sense. This might be my last question. I'd love to hear your thoughts around what is a fundraising team missing out on by not adopting AI into their practice? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but like what am I missing out on by not, leveraging AI for our fundraising activity?
If you're today not using AI, you're going to fall behind. That's the very simple truth. And maybe the best way to describe it, Justin, I don't know if you're old enough to remember not having even MapQuest, for instance.
I remember printing MapQuest, or printing directions. I think that was MapQuest, right? You got the directions and you printed them and you took them in the car with you because you couldn't have them on your phone.
Totally. So before MapQuest, you used to have to go to the AAA, the auto club, and they would do the map for you and print it out. And then MapQuest came out and it blew everyone's mind. I used it to drive to San Diego from Toronto. MapQuest, print it out. It was amazing. And then now we would never think of doing that.
Yeah.
Our phone is actually telling us turn by turn where to go, avoiding traffic. And not only that, it's telling us when to leave. And when we think about using AI in fundraising, it's the same thing. We could get to our destination, but what we need to do is elevate ourselves for higher level activity. If we're using this car analogy, how do I get there safely? How do I know I'm getting there on time? Do I have everything that I need? And then it also removes a giant burden from you on the administration.
Yeah.
So when you think of how that can have an impact on an organization, you start to really say it's almost an essential for you. Banks are going crazy with this, like large organizations have been investing in this for quite some time. It's half of Amazon's business, it's half of Google's business. It would be naive to think that we shouldn't be looking at this and finding ways to shortcut our way through our businesses.
Yeah. I think that the car analogy is so right on. And I'm wondering if you run into any sort of, I see it all the time within our kind of customer base. Specifically, we mine data through the payment. So when an organization or when an individual is donating, we're pulling in demographic information, wealth information that's not being obviously entered on the form. And I've noticed that some nonprofits have a really hard time kind of accepting that as like good practice. They feel like it's unethical to get this information. And I imagine there may be even some organizations that have a similar feeling to AI. Do you run into that at all within your clients or nonprofits that you've spoken to, just not thinking about AI kind of as more of an evil sort of part of technology versus something that's positive that can actually, drive much better results for the mission?
I would say when we started our business a couple of years ago, 2.5 years ago at this point, and then we were very focused on just our idea was to bring AI to the charitable sector. It was generally received as you guys are nuts. This is way too much for us. There's general concern that the data that a charity has isn't good enough for it. Which is entirely not true. I can tell you that I've looked at plenty of data sets for even Fortune 500 companies that don't compare to most charities. Charities are mandated by the government for good record keeping. So believe me when I say their data is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
Despite the fact that, the grass looks greener elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so I think those two things, coupled with a very tricky situation that I think most charities and fundraisers find themselves in, is that they care very deeply about the good work that they're providing. Donors specifically want all their donation gift amount to go towards the good works. and they have to decide, how do I reconcile these two things and spend money on something that makes my job easier? Maybe my job isn't supposed to be easier. It's hard for me to actually know. And the sort of like that cost per dollar raise pressure, coupled with data, coupled with maybe this will put me out of a job, which is not true at all. In fact, hopefully, what we find is that we're able to actually help charities understand how many gift officers and prospect researchers their database will support, as opposed to retracting.
Right.
Allow someone to grow. So it's kind of an interesting pressure that the charities find themselves in that regard.
Totally. Well, thank you, Wes, so much for sharing. I think what I really appreciate about the content today is you really broke down and made AI less scary for nonprofits, and just talking about the simple concepts of what are the outcomes we're trying to achieve. We're trying to increase capacity. We're trying to help you understand when and how much to ask from your donor base that exists today. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast to share with us your expertise. How can people get in touch with you if they'd like to learn more?
We are at fundraisewisely.com or wisely.ai. Go to our website. You can reach out to us there.
Awesome. We'll make sure to include that also in the podcast description section. But awesome. Wes, thank you again for joining. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Justin. See ya.
See ya. Thanks for listening to this episode of Nonstop Nonprofit. This podcast is brought to you by your friends at Fundraise, nonprofit fundraising software built by nonprofit people. If you'd like to continue the conversation, find me on LinkedIn or text me at 562-242-8160. And don't forget to get your next episode the second it hits the internets. Go to nonstopnonprofitpodcast.com and sign up for email notifications today. See you next time.